Extras.
When Myelana offered them a down payment, she went behind that pillar for a little privacy as she assumed her true form briefly and literally coughed up the gems. It seemed to me that even though these items were small enough to hypothetically regurgitate them in human form, if they were swallowed as a dragon, they would have merged with her body in a shapeshift, the same way her dragon form gear is not visible or usable in human form. Now, she can shapeshift out a worn item like the amulet because it's external, but she can't do that with something she's swallowed, and similarly, she can't shapeshift away something too large to wear, like the massive bear's heart. Some players wondered if she went behind the pillar because she was somehow embarrassed by her true form, but that would be pretty silly. She was, however, too proud to let them watch her disgorge items. Or it's always possible that she had something else in there which could have come up which she didn't want to show off. Side note, Myelana's goo people, the ones the party destroyed down the tram tunnel south of the maintenance station, who dropped Myelana's note about the northern terminus, are not connected to the one in Hengal. Sure, they're the same species, but like his partner, the Free Formian, that goo man was a freak who didn't fit in with his people. Of course, what they are and why are different questions. The +4 Helm of Intellect pushed Rainbow Dash very clearly from animal intelligence into sentience. Though she lacked vocal cords to speak, she was certainly able to understand Common now, and could potentially communicate back in other ways. It also allowed her to take a class level, though we all agreed that at Int 7 it wouldn't make sense for her to become a Warblade or a Spellcaster or something. Unfortunately, the teleport limitations still made it hard to bring her places, and she would have already been a little awkward due to her size. In hindsight, if I were smart or a good GM, I would have ruled that she only took one teleport slot like a medium creature as soon as she became Little One's leadership cohort. And this, of course, brought up another failure. Just like Draven's item familiar, 8, who you probably don't remember, as soon as the player adds another intelligent companion, I should come up with a personality for them, and, depending on the circumstances, usually I would want to confer with the player to make sure it worked for them. Both cases are a real missed role-playing opportunity. There are two main reasons that I think I missed this at the time. One, I'm creating all kinds of fun NPCs for myself to play all the time, so I'm not necessarily looking for unplanned RP opportunities the way I should be. And the other thing is, if I myself were a player with a familiar, or if I had a cohort which I had just made intelligent and previously had no real defined personality, in either case, my default would be to take over role-playing them and stage interactions between them and my actual character for humor, to add personality to both entities, and possibly as an alternate method of revealing hidden info about my character over time. When I'm a player, I'm always looking for some way to squeeze in and control more storytelling. Like, why be a barbarian when you could be a mind-controlling parasite using the barbarian's body, and gradually give hints over time that the body had different ideas, which occasionally slipped through my control somehow. So, it's one of those problems caused partly by subconsciously assuming other people think like me, when really I should be taking my cues from the players and working with the opportunities they created in improv style. More yes, and I was pretty happy with the mural, the image representing the accomplishments of Ashur. I like showing representations of the ancient world using images that resemble old Earth art styles, using Photoshop filters to make them look like the aged Tataran mural showing the Warforged, or the medieval tapestry lacking perspective in Legends the Red Sash depicting Korstrad under his new king. This one, made to look like a bas-relief carved in stone, features some vaguely Babylonian or Sumerian patterns, and while the stylized dragon and spider probably look nothing like anything in that style, Ashur's headgear sure does, and I think doubling of the head to show him looking both ways, and helping symbolize his dual nature as a warrior and a spellcaster, just feels right to me. Like two-headed eagles and other guardian beasts seen in many cultures throughout history. The shape of the Eye of Ashur amulet was supposed to be a pentagram, which is not really that hard to make on a computer, but for whatever reason, when making it, I hit upon the fourfold symmetry design you saw in the video. Instead of plain triangular points, it used a mountain symbol associated with Marduk, the same symbol I used to show Little One's mountain hammer maneuvers. Of course, as mentioned in the video, without breaking it open somehow, it's hard to know whether the amulet contains an actual eye or is simply forged in the shape of one. Which, as always, brings us back to the subject of inaccuracy of legends. Most of the ancient tales which have survived to the present day have done so with some errors, whether due to manipulation by one or more groups through the ages, or misunderstandings or bad assumptions by storytellers, or simply minor mistakes of memory or linguistic drift. Most of these inaccuracies I keep to myself, but let's use this one as an example. The tales tell that Ashur crafted the amulet after losing his eye in battle, which sounds cool, and most depictions of him indeed show him missing an eye, similar to his patron god who, whether worshipped as Marduk or Grumsh, is also shown in religious images as missing his left eye, and many of Ashur's greatest deeds took place after he crafted the amulet. But think about this a little. When you lose your eye in battle, it almost never pops out as, like, an eye. Usually when you lose an eye, it was really damaged or destroyed, cut open and gross. So when you see the amulet's perfect eyeball shape, that just doesn't sit right. It's not a clear thing. Maybe he did take the remains of his eye and either include them or sacrifice the remains of the eye as part of a crafting ritual. That's all believable from what we know of magic. But the reality is that at some point after Ashur lost his eye, he made his way to the pole, working his way down to the caverns of the ley line nexus, where he forged the amulet from his eye. From his remaining eye. Which means many of his greatest deeds were achieved with no eyes. When Little One asked Mailana when she last saw his father, he definitely didn't expect the answer she gave. 68 years. Little One's younger than he looks. Something about his unusual heritage had him looking quite adult at his current age of 15 or 16. But if his father had been pretty young when he caught the dragon's attention, say 20 years old, which itself seems odd that a centuries-old dragon would become so attached to a young, inexperienced human. 20 years old, an arbitrary minimum of 5 years together from the way she described their seasonal relationship, and then a 68-year gap, minus Little One's age, and you get a bare minimum of something like 77 years. Could Darius have met Lady Viserys and fathered Little One at the age of 77? Obviously, it's possible for a human, but at the very least, that is a weird timeline. Both dragons had told him this man was human, but there's a lingering question whether some dimension of this story, as they knew it, was wrong. Was Darius something other than human? Or was Little One older than he thought? Or had Mailana simply lied about the time frame, or, more generously, confused it due to the different chronological perspective of a very old and arguably immortal being? Fun fact, my concept of an Urugarai, a really large bear, was inspired by an episode of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. The Ursa Major. I was like, I'm stealing that. Father Bear is a prominent spirit of nature and the wild in the lore of the northern tribes. Father Bear is pretty clearly related to the Urugarai, but it's unclear if it's really a spirit or if it's just a reverence for the less supernatural big bears. But when faced with a creature of such immensity, it's not difficult to imagine it as a divine presence. Spirit/curing options, they had the white seed, and were cursed with the hubris for so long, while it kept not being the #1 priority, that I had gone through several different rough plans for how they could cure it if they went questing specifically for it. The very first was, when they first talked to a druid who told them about the hubris, they could have tracked down more druids. Then, when they made a deal with the Rajas, there was the possibility of asking them for a way, and I could have come up with some level-appropriate quest to send them on there. But as these options kept shifting, it kept being put off, and although the astral plague was always on their minds, it never seemed like number one when they had the seed protecting them. At this point, I can't even remember what all these things were, because they usually seemed like low-probability options, and most aren't recorded because when a quest has ended, I try to plan for everything the PCs might do. But while I try to overplan the thing I expect them to do, I do plan less for each option, down to the oddball, really unlikely choices where I just try to have a fuzzy idea to work off of, if they choose that path. But as for the options I presented them, the theories Draven had come up with were Option A, capturing an incorporeal undead and experimenting on it to devise some sort of bridge between their astral energy and some storage vessel. Option B, use their planar research so far and what Draven had learned from repowering the Eye of Ashur to empower the White Seed themselves from the Leyline Nexus. Of course, they have little control and little way to predict the result, which would almost certainly be a permanent change in the seed. Most of them were not a big fan of the possibility that the seed could change its mind about them, or lose the ability to help them, or become rooted to the spot somehow and thus unable to travel with them. Not mentioned in the video, for time, was option C, which they didn't strongly consider, which was the idea of heading to the Feywild to track down the secret hidden city of the gnomes. Hints from Thiswell and Angel led them to believe the gnomes may have some different knowledge, some different techniques for energy transfer. Some of this idea also came from the idea that the Atarans had been awesome at the tech stuff, and they seemed superficially similar to gnomes. This third option didn't get much consideration, given that, 1, it was the Feywild, 2, Angel wasn't super keen on going back to the gnome city. As a whisper gnome, her people largely defined themselves as not being there. And also, she's really not supposed to give away the location to non-gnomes. Though it's hard to say how important that is to her relative to really not wanting to go there. And 3, this option was at least as fuzzy as the other two, and just seemed like a less straightforward plan. So the focus was thoroughly on Theory A and Theory B, which were actually not the letters assigned to them during play. Option C was actually A. I had to adjust all the letters in a script to avoid getting into the gnome one. And you won't be surprised to hear that Little One's argument with Draven was quite a bit more extensive than in the video, though some of it was repetitive. Little One had a real problem with this concept of trapping a spirit of some deceased creature which had already been twisted and reanimated and effectively, from his point of view, enslaved by some evil being. Then you would take this thing and torture it and use it for your own ends. That went quite a few rounds, but the video really gives you the gist of it. My awesome Patreon patrons get these videos about a week early, giving them a chance to get their questions answered in this, the YouTube version of Extras. It's been so long working on Legends, the Red Sash, and episode 46 that there were a ton of Patreon questions this time, plus a couple I've bumped for Extras 46. Big Grin asked, how did you manage Draven's magical know-how in game? Was it simply a whole lot of back and forth, can I do this? What are my thoughts about this? Or did you use some sort of semi-rigid artificing system or handout? I can't claim to have a good system, but when it's working best, he proposes what he wants to do, and I come back with options for how much it would cost, whether it would take rare components to research, and how long he thinks it will take. I also might tell him something can't be done, but it's better to imply that it would be very hard/costly, and suggest that he would need to continue research in that direction. At some point, if I make something take a ton of work and some quest-based components, almost anything could be reasonable for the game, and potentially awesome, as long as the players work hard enough for it. Anybody Dead Yet asked, speaking of the spirit, Earlier it was said that the spirit would grow when in the presence of great triumph of good over evil. Now the party has stopped a horrific genocide planned by the Dark Ancients with seemingly no noticeable change in the spirit. If that doesn't do anything for the spirit, what can? It wasn't so much that it would grow when exposed to whatever. Rather, great and terrible things around it would shape what it would eventually become when it does sprout. And it's been exposed to a lot. From the Leyline Nexus and saving the world, to the black sands of Vecna's hut, to Dark Ancients, to the Feywild, the Shadowfell, and a whole lot of stuff in between. Jehovah the Rat asked, how specifically did you have the mechanics for Plan B worked out in advance? Did you have Spirit Seed mutation charts or something made up? I would guess that it would be a series of dice rolls as opposed to a single check. Is that right? I did not have the plans worked out with any specificity, because I really wasn't sure if they would go rescue Zahir first, or just go for the Empower Seed plan to get it out of the way. If rescuing Zahir, I'd have lots of time to work out a process of ethereal extraction. If they went for the quick and dirty, see what happens random plan, then I think I expected to be able to plan it out between sessions. Either way, there'd be a bunch of rolls, and some different possible results. But I was also pretty torn on the results of empowering the seed. See, I'm not a big random table sort of GM. My inclination would be to set out 2 or 3 specific options, set up DCs, and use the more favorable ones depending on the results of the skill challenge. But in this case, it feels like it should be a random table. That's definitely what I would do if I was writing a module rather than running a single campaign. I will say, I was leaning strongly towards the seeds sprouting into some kind of bizarre spirit tree down in the Leyline Nexus, where if they were really successful, it might just flat out cure them. But if they were less successful, they may have ended up in the awkward position of needing to return periodically for treatment to avoid the negative effects of the astral plague. Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin asked, how common are interpersonal relations between dragons and mortal races? Also, is it just magically empowered persons or other special things to either attract a dragon as a mate or survive to mate with a dragon, or can just anyone? And lastly, do they normally look so human? Dragons are fairly hedonistic. There's a bit of a conflict there because many dragons are far too proud to sully themselves by fooling around with lesser races. And there's a very powerful allure to the narrative of seducing another dragon. It's something nearly all of them dream of, though the truly powerful and respected see themselves as quite a catch, requiring a very impressive match. On the other hand, their hedonistic nature means that some of them will sleep with pretty much anything that moves, assuming they can shapeshift to some degree, which not all of them can. If the dragon can shapeshift into humanoids, or more rarely into any form, then surviving making love shouldn't be an issue. If they can't shapeshift, they have very limited options for non-dragon partners. Forming a strong, meaningful, long-term bond with a non-dragon is much less common. It definitely happens, because though dragons are rare, they live a long, long time, and your average dragon has an allure, an aura, a grandeur about them that makes it rare for members of other species to resist their advances. So the real obstacle for a shapeshifting dragon is their own interest. While a dragon doesn't often fall in love with some humanoid or spirit or magical beast, if they do find a non-dragon special enough in some way to capture their attention, some kind of relationship probably happens. And or something terrible, because a rejected dragon is bad news, and they don't always appreciate excuses like happily married. As for do they normally look so human, it's shapeshifting. So even in the more common form, humanoids only shapeshifting, they can look like any humanoid, or unlike them. Some dragons prefer to keep aspects of their true form, like horns and or a tail, or matching their skin to their scale color. Mayulana's habit of looking like someone's idealized idea of a human, using her clothing to call back to her true color, may be what she liked, Or maybe more an indication of what someone else liked to see. Anybody Dead Yet also asked, can players in your world choose Dragonborn as a race? If so, what are their stats? In the original setting document, I did provide Dragonborn as a playable race for my 3.5 campaign. Obviously nobody chose it, possibly because they only had so much information to go off of, or they already had characters in mind. Here's the sum total of what they got in that package. Dragonborn, thematically the 4th ed version, not the races of dragon type, are available in the setting, but not numerous. The remaining Dragonborn are refugees to this continent, as their homeland was reconquered by the True Dragons only 50 years ago, aided by a small army of Dragonborn Death Knights. Most of their people are thought to have been wiped out. Racial adjustments, +2 strength, -2 dex, -2 int. Dragonborn are strong, but cumbersome. Medium size, with a base speed of 30 feet. Dark vision 30 feet. A +2 racial bonus to knowledge, history, and to jump. Dragonborn have a breath weapon, usable once per encounter, or once per 5 minutes when not in combat, activated as a move action. At creation, Dragonborn choose fire, electricity, acid, or cold as their breath weapon damage type. This attack deals 1d6 damage in a 15-foot cone, reflex save for half, DC of 10 plus half character level plus charisma. The damage increases by 1d6 at 2nd level, and again at every 4th character level beyond that, so 6th, 10, 14, and capping at 6d6 damage at level 18. This is a supernatural ability. Asterisk, if the Dragonborn gains a damage-dealing breath weapon ability from another source, such as the Dragon Shaman class from PHB 2, or Dragonfire Adept from Dragon Magic, they may add 1d6 damage each time they use that ability, of the same damage type as their racial breath weapon, regardless of the other ability's damage type. Their favorite class? At creation, you select either Paladin or Dragon Shaman as your preferred class. In the non-patron questions, a viewer asked, we know the Vampire Kings can enslave spirits and use them for power. The Feywild seems pretty disorganized. Have they ever tried to invade or enslave some spirits there? Or does that not work because the Feywild is the opposite of the Shadowfell? The battle with Mordeval is indeed proof that once a boon from a spirit shackle has been granted, some, and from the looks of it maybe all, powers and abilities continue to function when the recipient is on another plane. The Vampire Kings themselves have rarely, if ever, been reported as leaving the Shadowfell, likely because only under the Dark Plane's impotent sun can they walk around unhindered in the daylight hours. As such, there is little known about the exact effects of sunlight on them, but clearly they tend to avoid it. They have plenty of powerful forces, though, and it is presumed they could prowl the Fadelands or Feywild at night. So the main reason we don't hear about a lot of spirit shackles in the Feywild appears to be twofold. First, conducting any kind of campaign or defending any location on another plane is a logistical nightmare. Even if you find, and can control or defend, a natural portal near your objective, the majority of those are only open for a few hours or even a few moments every day. Sometimes only on specific days, linked to tides, seasons, etc. So there's a lot of time when you are vulnerable to attack without any ability to reinforce, unless you are using planeshift spells, which have their own costs and drawbacks beyond just tying up a very powerful spellcaster. Second, while the Fadelands may be less attractive for shackles due to the relatively low number and typically weaker quality of spirits, the opposite is true in the Feywild. If you start binding them against their will with something so cruel and brutish as most forms of spirit shackle, a great many spirits are certain to take notice, and you might find yourself overwhelmed by everything from nature spirits to the Seelie and Unseelie courts, harassing, pranking, or flat out besieging you, even if the spirit you bound is one they don't particularly like. I want to give a big American Thanksgiving thanks to all my generous Patreon patrons and for all their great questions. Thanks so much for your continued support, with a special shout out to Aether Mordu, Zombie, Gorfiend, Surf USA, Pedrig of Rooney, and Big Grin, the members of the organization. And if you don't feel like supporting my channel financially, that's okay, but if you like it, please share Tales from My D&D campaign on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you do your social mediaizing.